What's up guys, hello to Football Talk here. We've arrived at draft week, only 3 or 4 days away depending on where you listen from Roger Goodell officially putting the Chicago Bears on the clock in Detroit, and it's time for me to reveal my final mock draft. Putting this thing together was as challenging as I can ever remember at this point, because of the uncertainty starting so early. I'm not going to shock anybody with the first overall pick here, but number 2 appears to be a coin flip, and then from 3 to 6, we could see a bunch of movement, which of course dictates everything that follows. So I might still talk about some potential adjustments that may be coming based on more information coming out, but let's have some fun here. This is going to be a predictive exercise, meaning based on what I hear, read, and believe will happen, rather than what I think teams should do. For my thoughts on about the 150 top prospects, I have detailed scouting reports on all of them at my site footballtalk.com, and in my most recent video, I talked about some of my personal favorites. Here we're going to make a way for the top 32 selections, plus fits for the 3 teams who don't currently own a first round pick. I didn't forget about you guys. And as I already teased, I'm not going for any hot takes or shockers here first overall, with the Chicago Bears selecting Caleb Williams, the quarterback out of USC. Because of all the intrigue around who will be QB2 and some wide-ranging opinions on how the 6 names generally discussed as first-round picks will ultimately come off the board, there actually hasn't been a ton of talk about Caleb Williams, on the field at least. To me, he's the best quarterback prospect I've personally evaluated in the 8 years I've actually really done work for the draft. The backyard style of play and Houdini-like play extension stuff is truly special, and why he gets a lot of the Patrick Mahomes comparisons. But what isn't discussed enough is how clean his mechanics are, the fact he fights to stay within the pocket, and how well he can operate within structure if he has the answers for what the defense is doing. Last year, the protection receivers he was working with at USC, along with the head-scratching offensive designs, have blurred the mind of some people, but I would be shocked if he didn't at least turn into a quality starter in Chicago for a long time, with the infrastructure they've built around him now as well, and he has a chance to be called the best signal caller in the franchise's history by the time he signs his second contract. Hope is coming, Bears fans. Now, number 2 overall with the Washington Commanders. This is where things get interesting, because we've had 3 different frontrunners to go second overall since Caleb became the overwhelming favorite in terms of betting odds. Right now I believe it's a toss-up between North Carolina's Drake May and LSU's Jaden Daniels, and since I have May graded significantly higher, that's what breaks the tie for me, so Drake May, quarterback out of North Carolina. I've been saying that this is the most overthought prospect in this draft. In terms of size, arm talent, composure, and mobility, this is what the NFL is always looking for, yet all of a sudden he's the guy people nitpick like crazy when it comes to things like locking out his front foot, not always having his base aligned, and some of the ultimate throws. The high level stuff he brings in terms of layered throws down the field, the off-platform deliveries, and the timely chain moving runs easily make me look beyond those, and I can live with him being a little bit too aggressive of a decision maker. With the continued investments into the offensive line and the pass catching crew they've assembled, I think he has the pieces around him to be successful in Washington. I'm just worried about what we'll get from Cliff Kingsbury, who coincidentally was responsible for some of the issues with some of Caleb Williams' tape as the OC for the Trojans last year, which can induce more hero ball tendencies as we've discussed with these top 2 names, but to me May has been the QB2 for a calendar year now. That brings us to the New England Patriots, and we've heard about the Patriots being open for business with this third overall pick, kicking off what could be 3 or 4 straight trades, but I actually think they stick and pick here, unless the Giants love whoever the Commanders don't take and move up 3 spots here. New England will likely be in contact with one of the 3 teams just outside the top 10, and that probably takes them out of the range for Notre Dame offensive tackle Joe Alt and the 3 of top wide receivers. So in this scenario, I don't think they get an offer that blows them away, and take the slam dunk player and Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver out of Ohio State. Nimble feet off the line, really strong to break free from physical corners, weirdly flexible in his ankles to make precise cuts for being 6'4", 205 pounds, tracks the ball exceptionally well, and his body control at that composition is just bonkers. He doesn't have the elite long speeds, and the reason some people have elite neighbors ahead of him as the top wide receiver in his class is that he doesn't offer a lot of creativity in the open field, but he's as complete and pro-ready a pass catcher as we've seen enter the league in a decade. The Patriots haven't built up the support system for a rookie quarterback yet, but this is a critical building block for if they end up picking early again next year, as they finally get a legit number 1 to go with the complementary pieces they have in place. Alright, let's get this party started now. The Cardinals have been connected as the Marvin Harrison team pretty much since the draft order was locked in. If he's available for them, I think it takes massive draft capital to move off him, but in this case he's off the board, and general manager Monty Ossenfort will be very happy to trade down. The Vikings have the highest draft capital offer here, and there could be some other teams in the mix, but I actually have the Las Vegas Raiders jumping up and taking Jaden Daniels, the quarterback out of LSU. In this scenario, to move up 9 spots, they also need to throw in pick 44th overall and a first rounder next year. However, I had to take the connection between Daniels and the guy who originally helped recruit him at Arizona State, and now Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce. I'm not sure if they'd be this aggressive for any other quarterback, but I think the Heisman Trophy winner lighting up the Death Star in Vegas should also have owner Mark Davis on board. I don't think this is a plug-and-play team yet, but they've looked at themselves differently, handing out a huge contract to Christian Wilkins in free agency, and Devonta Adams still being there as a star receiver, who I imagine catching a bunch of those slot fades that we saw Daniels air out for those LSU guys. I'm a little concerned about the development plan of offensive coordinator Luke Getsy, coming over from Chicago, where he was working with a similar type of profile, as more of a one-read-and-go player in Justin Fields, but this possibility isn't talked about enough, I believe. Which brings us to number 5 overall, and we keep the train rolling, as the Chargers at number 5 have been the obvious trade down candidate the entire way pretty much. Could they just stick here and take the top offensive tackle, or whatever they prefer as wide receiver 2 on the board, if they don't love any of the offers made to them? Sure, but they're motivated to add more shots here, and the Vikings didn't set themselves up this way if they didn't want to get the guy, which I believe is JJ McCarthy, the quarterback out of Michigan. No team has been linked more frequently to McCarthy than Minnesota, and even though I believe that if Drake May is available at number 3, they'll absolutely be calling New England, this just makes way too much sense. They swapped the 2 first rounders, 11th and 23rd overall, plus a second next year for this pick, and if there's a team set up to get the most out of JJ, it's them. Anybody who's taking a look at my personal big board, which you can check out at hellofootballtalk.com, knows I'm significantly lower on him than consensus, and I think it's crazy that we talk about him in this range, but with how long this has been in the works seemingly, this doesn't feel like a Will Levis type of smokescreen. This is one of the best situations we've seen a rookie quarterback drop into, where he has star receivers, a good offensive line, linked at the hip with a tremendous young play call and Kevin O'Connell, and having Sam Darnold there to not force him into the action right away. McCaffrey's willingness to attack the middle of the field, and the ability to deliver the ball accurately on the run with his flexible arm when he moved the pocket would fit very well. Number 6 overall, the New York Giants. The top 4 quarterbacks off the board, and while the noise around the Giants being ready to move on from Daniel Jones seems to be getting louder, I don't think they love either one of the 2 still available at this point, so instead I'm going to go chalk here and give them what would be the number 1 receiver in the vast majority of draft classes in Malik Neighbors out of LSU. There's been some discussion about how well his personality would fit in with a big market team, especially with how the marriage between the Merrill Tisch franchise and Odell Beckham Jr. eventually came to an end. But Neighbors provides a dynamism on the offensive side of the ball that this team has been severely missing since they moved on from OBJ. They already have a bunch of designated slot receivers on the roster, which is where this guy primarily operated from in 2023. But while I prefer him off the ball, I don't have too many questions about play strength, and I think he would be an awesome flanker. The instant acceleration pops off the screen, the way he can either threaten vertically and then snap off routes, or lure defenders into stopping the feet momentarily and then blows by them is rare. His focus and coordination hauling passes, even through contact, at just 6 foot, stands out, and then he's an absolute game breaker once the ball is in his hands. Bringing us to the Tennessee Titans, 7th overall, who have thrown their names out there as another potential trade down candidate, but I'll take another layup in what otherwise is a highly challenging draft to project in Joe Alt, the offensive tackle of Notre Dame. Personally, I have Olu Fashanu from Penn State just out of ultimate offensive tackle rankings, but this is still where he stacks up for me in the big board, and I think he's number 1 for the majority of NFL teams. 6'9", 320 pounds, with just over 34-inch arms, checked all the boxes from an athleticism standpoint at the combine, and then he's still improving as a 21-year-old former tight end, who's only been a full-time offensive lineman for the last 3 seasons with the Fighting Irish. Tennessee has let us know what they think of themselves, throwing big money at Calvin Ridley, still a solid sum for Tony Pollard, trading for and locking up L'Jarius Sneed on the defensive side of the ball. They want to see what they have in Will Levis during his rookie quarterback contract window. New Titans headman Brian Callahan hands a potential future All-Pro to his dad, and one of the great O-line coaches in Bill Callahan. No need to overthink this or get cute here. At number 8, we would typically see the Falcons logo pop up, but I have the Arizona Cardinals repeat what they did a year ago, when they allowed the Texans to read up to 3rd overall for Will Anderson Jr., but then pop back up for the offensive tackle of their choice in Paris Johnson. This time around, they secured themselves the last of the big 3 wide receivers in Rome Odunze out of Washington. For the move up by 5 spots, they give up the first of the 3 third rounders at 66th overall, plus one of the 5s, The reason they have to do this is that I can't really see Rome make it past the Bears or Jets as the next two teams up, and this way they still secure themselves a legit number one with what they currently have at the position. Odunze is incredibly smooth at 6'3", 210 pounds, who can elude press attempts but also has the strength to fight through contact. Looking at the reception-perception profile by Matt Harmon, he finished between above average to elite on every route he ran, and then his body control and ball skills are just insane. The way he adjusts to passes down the field and how he positions himself to win through contact is illustrated very well by the fact he had a 75% contested catch rate. While he's not quite as physical, we've already seen this type of profile match very well with Kyler Murray when he was working with DeAndre Hopkins, and now the other receivers they have in Arizona slot into them a natural pecking order. This of course really throws off the Bears here, and they may be scrambling a little bit, because Rome would have been pretty much perfect to round out the receiver room. With just 4 total picks in this entire draft, they certainly can't give up any more however, and if anything should be moving back. Where I do have them going is Dallas Turner, the edge defender out of Alabama. Once Montez Sweat arrived in Chicago at the trade deadline last year, this defense went from 30th overall all the way up to 5th with the final 9 games in terms of EP per play. They locked up the all-pro corner Jalen Johnson and brought in free agent safety Kevin Byard, but by allowing Yannick Ngakoue to walk, they're looking for that more bendy speed rushing profile across from Sweat. Dallas Turner tested well above the 90th percentile in the 40 in the jumps, to pair with 34.5-inch arms and a lot of jolt in those hands for the physical stature. That's why I believe he could actually develop into a high quality run defender, and at this point he's actually best converting speed to power as a pass rusher. If he continues to improve his hand combats to win at the top of the rush, with his explosion up the field and quicks to crossface blockers, or creates off the edges for himself by threatening inside initially, he could be a double-digit sack producer in multiple years of his rookie deal. Rounding on the top 10 now, with the New York Jets, I really thought about closing the chapter on the premium pass catchers with tight end Brock Bowers, who seems to be the clear favorite to be the pick here, but if the Jets are serious about winning this year, and also with themselves about where they could once again be vulnerable, they need to continue investing into the offensive line, and I have them going with Troy Fautanu, the offensive tackle / interior O-lineman out of Washington. They have the choice here of OT2 and could go several different directions, but I believe Fautanu presents the most logical choice here. Looking at Gangrene's currently slated starting 5, you can win with that group if you have it for a full 17, but Tyron Smith has played a total of 30 games over the past 4 seasons combined, and Elijah Vera-Tucker has only logged 12 starts since his rookie year in 2021. So even if whoever they select here doesn't start day 1 theoretically, you probably need him to fill in at one of those spots sooner rather than later. And that's where I love the match with Fautanu, because while all but 2 of his 31 career starts came at left tackle, I feel best about his ability to take snaps at 4 of the 5 spots at least, because of the easy movement skills he presents, whether that's sliding laterally to mirror pass rushers, or climbing up into the defensive backfield in the run game. Now pick 11 with the LA Chargers, this sets off a run on offensive linemen to some degree, with 7 of the 15 selections from pick 10 onwards being from that group. The Chargers were already linked to this player early on, and I wouldn't be shocked if they took him 5th overall, but in this case they had 2 more valuable selections and still got JC Latham, the offensive tackle of Alabama. They could certainly go Brock Bowers from Georgia here, without a difference-making tight end on the roster, or take a top corner, but the messaging by Jim Harbaugh and general manager Joe Ortiz has been clear, wanting to become a bigger, more physical team. Well, how does a 6'6", 340-pound All-ACC right tackle from Alabama sound? Latham packs a ton of raw force in those 11-inch hands, and can unlock the lower half to dig out defenders out of the lane. 35-inch arms extend his range as a pass protector, and then when he puts those clamps on you, he puts you in a cage. Finally, a couple of bad plays from the college football playoff game against Harbaugh's Wolverines is what people refer to negatively with him, but he played a really good game that day otherwise, and I think offensive coordinator Greg Roman is licking his chops at the possibility of swapping out Trey Pipkins off a regression year for this guy. 12 overall, this is where I make another trade, and of the ones I've done so far, this is not the cleanest one to predict. However, there's no player that truly sticks out to me for the Broncos in terms of a need they want to address and where the value exists. They could absolutely target this player here themselves, but I think Jaguars GM Trent Baalke will be even more intrigued with his profile and be willing to trade up for Quinion Mitchell, the cornerback out of Toledo. And the Broncos should be very interested in getting a 2nd round pick back, since they don't currently own one themselves, in exchange for the 4th, plus one of the 2 5s as they move down 5 spots. Right there in terms of the measurables you're looking for, 4.33 speed, major ball production, dominated the MAC level, and has absolutely rocked his pre-draft process. The 2 days Mitchell spent at the Senior Bowl were as clean as I've ever seen for a corner, with how easy he could D and re-accelerate, wants to look and make plays on the ball, and while he played a lot of off-zone coverage, he has 10-inch hands and the mirror skills to project as someone who could become more effective in press. So while they have Tyson Campbell in the final year of his rookie deal, with a decision looming, Quinion can jump into the spot of Darius Williams, who they shockingly released early in the offseason, playing off with vision on the quarterback in that field side role that he also excelled at with the Rockets. Bringing us to pick 13, and as you can probably remember, the Falcons moved back 5 spots in this scenario, because while edge is the clear favorite in terms of positions that they want to address, they probably feel confident that they can get one of those big 3 names at the top still. And with how this played out, Alabama's Dallas Turner is the only one off the board, so the decision here came down to Florida State's Jared Verse, and the guy actually picked for them, Laiatu Latu, the edge defender out of UCLA, who, if you take away the injury concern, I believe is a very strong case to be the best defensive player in this draft at this moment. His technical advancement with all the different hand combats in his toolbox, how he counters the approach of tackles against him, and is able to build up comprehensive rush plans in those individual matchups, is about as good as you're going to find for a college player at that position. Not the type of freakish athlete or has the length of Turner, but I don't have any concerns with the functional movement skills. He's not a firm edge setter by the book in the run game necessarily, but the block deconstruction and ability to create quick stops are on display with him. Latu gets to reunite with his former defensive coordinator at Washington and Jimmy Lake, who along with Raheem Morris will value his ability to peel into coverage occasionally, on top of immediately becoming the best true edge rusher. Staying inside the NFC South now with the New Orleans Saints, you kinda know that this pick is going to be an offensive tackle, or that power profile edge defender that they love so much. I went with the former because of how pressing a need it is, giving them old-fashioned new the offensive tackle at Penn State. The Saints' tackle situation is somewhat quietly an absolute catastrophe. Trevor Penning unfortunately has been even more problematic in his first season of action than I thought he might be when he traded up for him in the draft 2 years ago, getting benched eventually with Andrew Speed moving out to left tackle from guard, whose only remaining presence on the roster is his $13 million dead cap hit. And then we recently got news on Ryan Ramczyk on the right side, with his degenerative knee issues, which could lead to an early retirement. Fashion is actually my number 1 tackle, right there with Notre Dame's Joe Alt, and he would have been a top 10 pick in last year's draft by all accounts. One of those names who has just been overthought during the process, and while he didn't show a whole lot of improvement in the run game, where he's still more of a positional blocker than a road grader, he doesn't have many missed assignments in that regard, and then he has the ability to become an elite pass protector, thanks to his impeccable balance and quick hands, even if they're weirdly small. My hand comparison for him is Texans Pro Bowler Laramie Tunsil. At pick number 15 now with the Indianapolis Colts, corner is certainly something GM Chris Ballard could be looking to address after they were just throwing day 3 picks and undrafted free agents out there last year to see who sticks. Yet this is where the Brock Bowers slide stops, the talent out of Georgia. This has been one of the more fun pairings I've envisioned throughout this process, between Bowers and head coach Shane Steichen. The Colts have a couple of young tight ends that they like in Jelani Woods, Calvin Granson, and even Drew Ogletree, along veteran Mo Alley Coxell on the contract. So this doesn't jump out as a spot on the depth chart, but you don't have anybody of note. With that being said, that designation doesn't do Bowers justice, and it's more about the ways I can imagine him being used by a creative offensive coordinator. He can obviously stretch the seams and run away from guys in crossing routes, but he can split out as a single receiver on the backside of the formation and win on all 3 levels with the way he can effectively break off routes. The hand-eye coordination and strong hands in tight areas stand out, but then it's that extra gear after the catch and the horsepower to drag tackles along with him that made him a man amongst boys even in the SEC. Now you add him to those 2 towers they have on the outside, Michael Pittman Jr. and Alec Pierce. Josh Downs is a more quick-footed player in the slot, and a guy in Bowers who can eat over the middle of the field. For Anthony Richardson to work with in year 2, this offense could really take off. At 16th overall with the Seattle Seahawks, when we get to them in these mock drafts, typically you see them go offensive line here, or with an edge rusher that falls to them, but I actually have them addressing the interior defensive line here with Byron Murphy II out of Texas. There are still a couple of offensive tackles from what I believe is the top 6 available here, but with Mike McDonald coming over from Baltimore to take out his franchise, I believe he wants to bring them back to the glory days of the Legion of Boom. And what you do on the back end doesn't really matter as much when you feel like you're constantly being compromised by having to put more focus on the front. Seattle has finished 26th and 29th respectively in rushing EPA defensively these past 2 years, thanks to a combination of front dynamics, slow linebackers, and the lack of consistent play from the nose tackle spots. And I'm not saying Murphy's going to be lining up at the zero technique for them primarily and single-handedly fixing the run defense, but he actually spent more time there than his teammate Devondre Sweat, who has a good 60 pounds on him. This guy's an innate feel for where pressure has been applied from, and you see him at times with body contorted, knee just inches off the ground, anchoring against double teams. Then if the offense spreads him out, he can line up in the B-gap, come off the ball like a submarine under the reach of the guard, or take that guy into the quarterback's lap. Right now he's playing a little bit out of control, but you let him learn from Leonard Williams and Draymond Jones, he could turn into a legit game wrecker. Alright, Denver Broncos finally on the clock, and there are multiple avenues I could take here. I already mentioned that they could address cornerback 2 opposite of Pat Surtain, with someone like Terran Arnold from Alabama, and even though I like some of the young guys on the edge, Florida State's Jared Verse could make a lot of sense here. However, they cannot be trotting Jarrett Stidham out there for 17 weeks, and I've really liked his landing spot the entire time for Bo Nix, the quarterback out of Oregon. I know people won't like this, and feel free to turn off the video once you hear me say it, but Nix is actually my QB3, one spot ahead of LSU's Jaden Daniels on the big board. Even if this is more of a reflection of me being down a little bit more on this quarterback class, past Caleb Williams and Drake May, I think Bo would be a tremendous fit with head coach Sean Payton for a quick trigger passing attack where he can accurately deliver the ball based on what leverage and coverage structure dictates, unlike the frustrations he had last season with Russell Wilson. Moreover, I think Nix has been falsely labeled as a checkdown captain. He can absolutely push the ball deep for Cortland Sutton, and then his ability to manipulate rush angles, escape potential sacks, and create secondary reaction plays is highly underrated, more so based on how well he executed the Ducks offense within structure. Pick 18 now with the Cincinnati Bengals. I'll look at them fairly similarly as the Saints, less in terms of truly pressing needs, but having the eyes set on guys on the edge of the line, whether that's on offense or defense, as long as Georgia tight end Brock Bowers isn't available at least. I have to take in what is generally considered the better player between those two spots, in Talise Fuanga, the offensive tackle out of Oregon State. Also because they selected Miles Murphy out of Clemson late in the first last year, who hasn't really gotten onto the field for them a whole lot, but looked pretty good in limited action. I could absolutely see Fuanga go as high as number 10 to the Jets, who he's been linked to regularly, and this is pretty much the floor for him in terms of the draft range. Purely as a run blocker, he may be the very best of the bunch as a mean people mover, whether that's latching into edge defenders and taking them for a ride in the front side of zone concepts, driving a free technique backwards on combos with the guard, or tossing linebackers to the turf when asked to climb. He doesn't have the top and length for foot agility, where he'll be challenged in new ways by NFL speed off the edge, but he dominated against a murderous row of Pac-12 threats in the pass game. I think he may start at guard, and as soon as Trent Brown misses any time, which is highly likely, sticks at right tackle for a long time. At pick 19, we welcome back the Los Angeles Rams to the first round, for the first time since they selected Jared Goff number 1 overall, all the way back in 2016. Of course they feel weird here to pick this early, and when the Eagles call up about moving up 3 spots, they do so in exchange for a second rounder to now on picks 52 and 53, while giving Philly number 83 and one of the 2 back-to-back 5s. With that, the Eagles secure themselves Terrion Arnold, the cornerback out of Alabama. We all know about the Eagles' struggles on the back end last season defensively, and while they may also just stick at 22 and get a Cooper DeJean from Iowa, who can also fill in the nickel or even play some safety for them, I believe Arnold will generally be rated higher and play inside or out for them. I'm sure they regret the contracts they handed out to veterans Darius Slay and James Bradbury last offseason now, but they can get out of those next year, and Avonte Maddox is only back for this season at a $2 million price tag. So however they want to approach this, Arnold is almost definitely an upgrade at one of those 3 spots, and for a forward-thinking franchise, they will value the flexibility this provides in the future. Personally, I have Arnold as my CB4 because he gets a little slop in his back pedal, and savvy route runners can get him turned the wrong way, but he's springing to click and close from off alignment, has the loose hips to recover if opened the wrong way initially, and I don't think he plays like he runs a 4.51, with some of the reps of him hanging with speedsters down the field. Add in the ball production his 1 season as a starter, and how aggressive he is coming downhill, I think new Eagles defensive coordinator Vic Fangio will love him. Bringing us to pick 20, and we get straight to another trade, as the Pittsburgh Steelers are certainly tempted by the possibility of replacing Deontay Johnson with whoever they think is the number 4 receiver in this class, but they surrender that right to pick him here to the Buffalo Bills, due to how they've developed the position of mid-rounders for a steep price of picks 128 and 153, as the Bills come up from 28 to select Brian Thomas Jr., the wide receiver out of LSU. By trading away Stephon Diggs to a young contender in the Texans, along with, to a lesser degree, allowing Gabe Davis to walk in free agency, they've created a pretty substantial hole on the outside. I've really liked Khalil Shakir since I watched him at Boise State, Curtis Samuel is someone who could be a high volume target, an extension of your run game. But if you're looking for that big bodied X receiver, you're asking last year's 5th round pick Justin Schroeder or free agency addition Mac Hollins to step up massively. Those guys are certainly more straight liners who can be ball winners down the field for you, which finally is kind of the profile Thomas Jr. presents as well at this point, but I think he can clearly be more than that eventually. His juice off the line, the ability to elude contact in more fluid fashion, and how can reduce his height at the breakpoint for being nearly 6'4", project much better into someone who can win on all 3 levels. At LSU, his route tree was definitely limited with a ton of hitches and goes, but that extra gear to run under one of Josh Allen's bombs, and then how he can pierce up the field or slide inside of pursuit defenders with the ball in his hands, could make him highly productive for Buffalo. Sticking in the AFC East now with the Miami Dolphins 21st overall. When I look at the Dolphins, I think 2 positions clearly stand above the rest in terms of where they might go here: offensive line and edge defender. The latter is largely based on the fact that both Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb are coming off season-ending injuries, which they suffered late in the year, but at least Chubb could be available once week 1 rolls around with the torn ACL, and they did add veteran Jack Barrett as a free agent, so I'm more focused on the guys they're putting in front of Tua Tagovailoa, and the name that jumps out is Graham Barton, interior offensive lineman out of Duke. Played left tackle at an all-conference level for the Blue Devils these last 2 years, but expected to move inside due to the lack of arm length, and even more so because of how well his game translates to the interior. Explosive out of his stance, latches and sustain with a finishing mindset as a run blocker, along with being able to showcase that tremendous athletic profile that he backed up at his pro day as a puller, able to use his hands in alternate fashion, adjust his aiming points, and works with a great understanding for the depth of the pocket, which is why I only give up 2 total sacks and QB hits combined over the last 2 years each. Whether they need him to jump in at center for Connor Williams leaving, or if Aaron Brewer can stick there to take over for Robert Hunt at right guard, he could be a quality starter at either, along with kicking out the tackle in a pinch. Which brings us to pick 22 with the Los Angeles Rams, who I already described trade back 3 spots in the scenario, and I think they have to go defense here with how much they've invested financially into the offense. Nobody's currently slated to spend a lower rate of the cap dollars on that side of the ball than them at just 25%. I could certainly see them address the interior D-line with the retirement of Aaron Donald, or inject some youth into an old corner room, but I think they take what will be the highest guy on many boards still available, in Jared Verse, the edge defender out of Florida State. How quickly Byron Young and Kobe Turner emerged as difference makers on the D-line as rookies was a very pleasant surprise for them, but they're still looking at Michael Hoyt once again starting at the second outside linebacker spot, where he was asked to drop into coverage well over 200 times last season at 300 plus pounds. Now, Verse doesn't have a whole lot of experience with that, but I think they'll ask him to go forward much more regularly because of the difference he can make there. This guy comes out of his stance with some fire, he has heavy hands to set the tone on contact and be a physical edge center in the run game. Those violent chops also allow him to swat down the reach of tackles and pass plays. And then he's the best at condensing his rush lanes, taking advantageous paths to the quarterback by utilizing his power. He's not an elite bender, but would immediately be the top edge rusher on this team. 23rd overall, the Los Angeles Chargers are back on the clock after trading down with the Minnesota Vikings. As you look at this bold step chart, they still need plenty of help. They took care of their one big need on offense with Latham at right tackle. Consider they can still add another receiver in this insanely deep class later. Defensively, there's no linebacker worth the selection, but they could go corner here. With that in mind, thinking about the years under Brandon Staley, and what stood out to me is how soft they were at the spine of the defense. Let's change that with Jerson Newton, interior defensive lineman out of Illinois. While Michigan didn't face the Fighting Illini this past season, Jim Harbaugh saw the reigning Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year collect a couple of tackles for loss, QB pressures, and a better pass when they met in 2022. To me, Johnny Newton is one of the more underappreciated players in this draft class, can knife through gaps and disrupt, or pulls blockers off himself when the ball is in range. Already pretty advanced in terms of hand usage, reading the pass sets of interior protectors, where there are opportunities to land crossface moves or transition to power. And then he's the best guy in this class at cornering his rushes from his inside alignments. I have him 13th overall on my big board, and he'd be a homer pick here. The Harbaugh era starts with 2 cornerstone pieces in the trenches on both sides of the ball, which is very fitting. Pick 24 now with the Dallas Cowboys. Duke's Graham Barton has been a fit that I've liked for the Cowboys, plugging him in at center for Tyler Biadasz or at left guard, where Brock Hoffman and TJ Bass are currently projected to start respectively, expecting Tyler Smith to move back out to left tackle. And I'm not ruling out Oregon's Jackson's Power Johnson at all here, but with one of the top 6 tackles still available, I think that's where they need to go here, with Amarius Mims, the offensive tackle out of Georgia. I'd say it's more likely that he's gone at this point, because I believe he has the potential to develop into a top 5 player from this entire draft. With that being said, only 8 career starts and the foot injury he was fighting for this past season, along with pulling a hammy at the combine when he had a chance to wow NFL decision makers, could push him down the board a little bit. But my god, this dude is built like Thanos at 6'8", 340 pounds, with almost no excess weight, a ton of natural power and athletic feet. There's certainly room to grow in terms of framing rushes off the edge, but I think it's all due to a lack of experience rather than being raw with how good his tape was already. If you can get consistent temperament in the run game out of this guy, you're talking about someone with all-pro potential. Mims actually split practice time pretty evenly between left and right tackle, so he can be a replacement for Tyron Smith on the blind side, while Tyler Smith can stay at the spot he was just named the second team All-Pro at. Bringing us to the Green Bay Packers 25th overall, and they're one of those teams whose expectations changed fairly quickly once we saw Jordan Love emerge as a top 10 quarterback over the latter half of this past season. So while they don't operate in a way that they'd accelerate the clock for themselves, also because they don't have the benefit of Love being on a true rookie deal, I think it may keep them from drafting another one of those talented defensive players who may not be ready to contribute right away. Instead, I'm looking at adding in one more weapon in the pass game, but understanding that they just don't do this in the first round, I think the guy who can immediately make an impact here is Jackson Powers-Johnson, the interior offensive lineman out of Oregon. JPJ is right there with Brian Barton for me in terms of the top interior O-lineman in this class. Excellent zone block in terms of horizontal movement that he provides, the ability to keep his hands latched and willingness to finish defenders. You love the way he flies out in space as part of the screen game. And in pass protection, he plays with busy eyes if unoccupied initially, while having a strong base to anchor against powerful D tackles, not letting him get away anymore once he establishes control. If he can clean up his placement of snaps, I think he's an upgrade right away over Josh Myers at center, and while like Sean Ryan, the same is true for right guard. At worst, he's going to be a premier backup for all 3 interior spots right away, and once he gets into the lineup, he's not going to leave it anymore. Pick 26 now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm sure if one of those 2 top-ranked interior O-linemen is available for the Bucs at 26, they'd strongly consider it for the somewhat open left guard spot, but otherwise this really comes down to edge rusher or corner on defense, since they let Jack Barrett walk and traded Carlton Davis to Detroit. I went with Chop Robinson, the edge defender out of Penn State. A little undersized at 6'3", flirting with 250 pounds, and just 32.5-inch arms, but this guy's first step and ability to threaten the corner with speed plus bend is as good as anybody in this class. He's sort of a one-trick pony at this point and doesn't string together pass rush moves in a comprehensive fashion yet, but watching him snatch and lift the outside hands of tackles in order to create a softer angle for himself, and some of the cat-like quicks and up and unders make me believe he could still find enough success on third downs to buy himself time as the rest of his game develops. I like how low he plays and the strength in his triceps to lock out in the run game. He just needs to get his upper and lower half more synchronized, so I think this is the range he should be taken in, but the payoff could be massive. If Tampa plays with more even fronts basically on early downs, but Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is the only legit outside linebacker on the field, and Yaya Diaby is the guy on the opposite end of the line, allowing Chop to come in fresh and drop back settings, that would be an optimal situation. And we stick on the defensive front here for the Cardinals, 27th overall, who already addressed the number 1 receiver slot that they needed to fill, and now need to add a difference maker on the opposite side of the ball, with Darius Robinson, the edge defender / interior D lineman out of Missouri. He's someone who jumped up into the first round conversations during Senior Bowl week, then hype cooled off a little bit when he tested poorly in comparison to a lot of the smaller edges at the combine, but is on the rise again seemingly with how good his on-field workout at the Missouri Pro Day looked like. Packs incredible vigor in his hands combined with 34.5-inch arms to control a point of attack, work off blocks, and create negative plays in the run game. As a pass rusher, he heavily relies on the power as well, but you do see him surprise opposing linemen with his agility and rapid hands to arm over them. The Cardinals haven't had a guy like this who can mush up the pocket and then push off guys in order to find secondary escape lanes for himself with that inside-out flexibility since Calais Campbell 3 coaching staffs ago by now. Even with how badly they ultimately performed statistically, in part due to some injuries they were dealing with, we've heard a bunch of players mention how tough Arizona's defense was to prepare for because of all the funky stuff they threw at them. Robinson is another piece in that, and someone I don't think makes it out of the first round. So I had the Steelers moving back 8 spots with the Bills, here at 28, punting on the chance to take what is considered the consensus number 4 receiver, and in this scenario neither one of the potential centers is available anymore, which would make a lot of sense for them. They could go with whoever they believe is the next best tackle, but we've seen the focus on this franchise being the back end defensively, and I think there's no better fits than Cooper DeJean, the defensive back out of Iowa. He gets to stay in the black and yellow for another tough-minded organization that prides itself on defense. However, the Steelers have finished 26th and 21st respectively in net yards per pass attempt these past 2 seasons, because they've been going through athletically limited veterans at those corner spots. Getting Joey Porter Jr. at the top of day 2 last year gives them some of legit pressman ability with how much cover 1 they like to run on early downs. And they did trade Deontay Johnson for Dante Jackson from Carolina this offseason, who at least gives them some playmaking ability on the far side of the field. DeJean now perfectly fits into the nickel spots. He can match up with Mark Andrews and David Njoku from the detached alignments. His spatial awareness and football IQ allow him to get his hands on the ball in zone coverage. And whether he's moved tighter into the formation against the run, or you want to blitz him off the edge, you don't need that separate big nickel package. DeJean is going to finally fill that void left behind by Mike Hilton, who has been one of the league's best slot defenders for the division rival Bengals, and he's also going to provide some consistency in the return game. Alright, this brings us to the final 4 teams from last season, with the Lions being on the clock after giving away the NFC title game in heartbreaking fashion, but they actually get a call from the reigning Super Bowl champs and the Chiefs, who want to avoid the Ravens and 49ers snatching up the guy, which I believe is Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver out of Texas. I personally believe Detroit should select him here themselves to round out their receiving corps with a legit outside threat, but Casey gives up the 4th round, 131st overall for that right. I understand that this is somewhat of a divisive name, because the fantasy football community and data nerds talk about his highly concerning statistical profile, but the film truthers love his game, and that's the corner I'm in. I see some of the plays where people might call it a lack of effort, and I agree with them to some degree as a blocker at least, but this is one of the most skilled route runners I've evaluated. The term I've used to describe him is that he paints a picture of the way he sets up defenders, attacks the blind spots, and is able to make adjustments on the fly based on the technique of the guy in front of him. The foot quickness and elusiveness of the line pairs up beautifully with that to win his legit X in isolated situations, and while he doesn't always play up to it, you do see the 4.35 speed and ball tracking skills to win down the field. Mitchell hasn't been a dynamic yak threat, in part because of his high depth of target, but he snatches the ball with defenders converging on him, and I think is exactly what the Chiefs need here. Now you have him on the backside of the formation, Hollywood Brown clearing out space with his speed, Travis Kelce taking advantage of that free real estate, and we'll see what happens with the Rashee Rice situation, with him being the run of the catch specialist. Bringing us to the Baltimore Ravens at 30th overall. If Mitchell were available here, I would love that as an Odell Beckham Jr. replacement, and now you'd really be cooking with 3 first-round picks at receiver around the reigning MVP, but I think they very much have the eye set on the offensive tackle position. They traded away a long-term veteran Morgan Moses for a day 3 pick swap. Ronnie Stanley on the left side is still in and out of the lineup, and while I think Josh Jones was a sneaky signing in free agency, I'd be surprised if they don't address this group in the first 2 rounds. So I have them taking Jordan Morgan, offensive tackle of Arizona. He's someone I think hasn't been talked about enough throughout this process. Coming off a torn ACL in the year prior, the voters still snuck him into the first round All Pac-12, despite the amount of talent he had in the conference this past season. Tremendous athleticism for his own run game, being able to execute backside cutoffs or gliding to the second level, great burst out to the corner when Baltimore wants to run those sweep plays with Lamar Jackson, with impressive reactionary skills on the fly, smoothing his kick slide with the mental capacity to change up his technique in accordance to his matchup. Not like an overpowering drive blocker, and the length will be a question, with his arms being an eighth short of 33 inches, but he regularly is first to establish meaningful contact with rushers, and the agility to mirror crossface moves is excellent. And we actually stick with the position group, since the Niners couldn't finish the job in the Super Bowl because of the issues on the right side of the offensive line. They take the guy that is regularly knocked ahead of Morgan, even though I personally have them stacked up this way, in Tyler Guyton, offensive tackle Oklahoma. He created a lot of buzz early on during Senior Bowl week because he saw the athletic traits on tape, but his ability to anchor is what stood out on day 1 at least. That went away a little bit as edge rushers started to figure out how they could win the outside shoulder with well-timed swipes at the near arm, and because he's so tall in his pass sets, he tends to widen his base too much, making him vulnerable to lateral movement. However, there's still a lot to like with this guy at 6'8", 320 pounds. Some of the dominant reps you see on tape in the run game when his hands and feet are connected to toss people out of the club, along with the length and recovery tools and pass protection. He'll be taking under the wings of another former Oklahoma tackle who had some things to work on in order to reach his sky-high potential in Trent Williams. Which brings us to the end of the first round, where the hometown team hosting this event finally gets to make the selection, which is always fun as we think back to the Chiefs doing the same a year ago. It would have been cool if it was another nearby product like Darius Robinson, who grew up in Michigan and would make a lot of sense here for them, but I'm addressing the other big need on defense with Nate Wiggins, the cornerback out of Clemson. My personal CB2, and I think someone with the physical ability to be a legit shutdown number 1 corner which is rare in today's game. He's such an incredibly loose athlete, has instant explosiveness in that ability to plant and drive from off alignment, 4-8 speed, and you see the elite recovery skills, where his footwork isn't by the book a lot of times, but he somehow makes it work. The eyes and range to make plays and routes in his vicinity, combined with the awareness to identify route combinations as a zone defender is special, and then he can really climb the ladder and compete for the ball in the air. There's some fine-tuning needed where he gets a little too aggressive driving on the initial break, which makes him vulnerable to double moves, and the big question of course is the frame at 6 foot, right around 175 pounds, but he's more than willing to race up and attack bigger ball carriers down low, and his effort combined with the speed and pursuit led to some tremendous chase down plays. The Lions want to run so much man or match coverage, but they've added Carlton Davis who can battle with those bigger bodies, but now Wiggins is a de facto number 2 as a rookie at least. He could be a star with major ball production if targeted frequently. That brings the first round to a close, and you can read over it all here again, but I did want to just briefly hit on a couple of other players I considered here. Michael Penix Jr., quarterback Washington. I could absolutely see a team jump back up into the first round to select him, secure the potential of a 50 option, but with Penix you already have a guy that is 24 years old as a rookie, and we know plenty about what he is, even though we may not be fully sure what the transition to the pros looks like. 34 to the Patriots is very much possible if they don't take a quarterback up high, and I could see the Raiders potentially trading up early in the second round if they don't make that move early themselves, very much in the mold of what happened to Will Levis coming out of Kentucky last year as the second pick of day 2. A few other receivers I was thinking about, but we'll get to one here in a second. Just felt the need to mention Xavier Worthy from Texas, because the NFL obviously loves speed, and this officially is the fastest man to ever enter the league, so I don't expect him to hang around for very long if he doesn't actually go in the first round. Kool-Aid McKinstry, quarterback Alabama, my number 3 corner, worth of going somewhere in the 20s. I was kind of going back and forth with him and Wiggins, who was just ahead of my rankings, and with how much single high he liked to run, he would have also made a lot of sense for the Steelers, but recovering from that foot surgery and not having done the agility drills at his pro day, as good as I think he is at anticipating routes and disrupting receivers off the line, in this case he has to settle for early second rounds. And 2 long shots that I want to bring up here quickly. Marshall Nealand, edge defender Western Michigan, had an excellent Senior Bowl week, followed up by some great combine testing at 6'3", around 270 pounds, someone with incredible play strength and untapped potential as a player who wasn't always put in position for major production. And Edgerrin Cooper, linebacker Texas A&M, in a fairly underwhelming linebacker class, he stands out in terms of athletic ability and some of the high-end plays he put on tape, as a guy that can shoot gaps and create tackles for loss in the run game, blitz from different alignments, and has the loose movement skills to make plays in coverage. NC State's Peyton Wilson, I've just had of Cooper as my LB1, but of course he comes with a pretty scary medical history. But now let's show some love to the teams that don't currently own the first round pick, and we start with who would have been slated to pick first overall, if not for trading up there last year to select Bryce Young, the Carolina Panthers, and I have them taking Ladd McConkey, wide receiver Georgia. This is very much in line with what you see out there in mock drafts, with Ladd being a guy right on the fringe of the late first, early second rounds. I think there's enough out there by now, with people being clowned for comparing him to all the other well-known wide receivers we've watched in recent years. He can certainly win on option routes and pick away against matchups in the slot, but Ladd actually played nearly 80% of snaps on the outside last season, and will be lining up at Z in 2 wide receiver sets, threatens vertically off the line, great ability to alter speeds and give defenders false indicators, solid hands, routinely makes the first man miss after the catch, and a smart invested blocker. He's my wide receiver 6, also strongly considered Ricky Pearsall from Florida, who I have right behind him in my rankings. Another light-skinned dude who is labeled as a slot only, but brings the same kind of speed component, and I think can absolutely play as a flanker. I just think Ladd projects a little bit more as a volume guy for a team that has targets to spare, based on what they have on the roster currently. Then we've got the Houston Texans, 42nd overall, who have taken Braden Fisk, interior defensive lineman, Florida State. Looking at this Texans roster, there's not a whole lot you're considering his actual needs in terms of starting players, but rather depth on the offensive line and secondary, which I believe they can address later. Someone who could get on the field early and make real impact for them is Fisk. They brought in Foley Fatukasi and Nico Autry in free agency, both actually from division rivals, along with Mario Edwards Jr. as another guy with inside-out flexibility. However, in terms of natural free techniques, playing on the edge of the guard, and creating penetration, which D'Amico Ryans and defensive coordinator Matt Burke have valued highly during their time in San Francisco, they don't really have anybody that you'd expect to play volume snaps for them currently. I believe there's some concerns about Fisk's ability to deal with double teams and being outreached by blockers at around 290 pounds with 31-inch arms. However, the ball get-off is right up there with Texas' Byron Murphy for the best in the class among the D tackles, packs a nice club rip move, capable of cross-facing guards, and plays with a relentless motor. He may not even have to play a whole lot on first downs for his Texans team, but then he'll boost that interior rush in designated passing situations. And finally, the Cleveland Browns 54th overall, Junior Colson, linebacker Michigan. Finally, I did want to bring a linebacker into the equation, which was one of the two positions along with safety, unless you count Iowa's Cooper DeJean as such, but you might not see anybody get selected until this point. The Browns are very much like the Texans in terms of a roster, where the starting 22 offense and defense combined is very complete. They have more standout players, I'd argue, but quarterback obviously is a much bigger question mark for them. As we look at this Cleveland defense, which finished first or second in pretty much every meaningful metric, they're bringing back basically everybody from the group a year ago, other than Anthony Walker Jr., who's been a guy that's kind of been a glue piece at middle linebacker, but they haven't been willing to commit to, signing one-year deals each of the past 3 seasons, and he signed with Miami this offseason. Now you're looking at Jordan Hicks or Devin Bush to fill that spot, alongside Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Junior Colson should be an upgrade over either one of them, because he can actually stay on the field for all 3 downs, rarely gets caught out of position, excellent short area burst to fill gaps in the run game, sturdy to deal with bigger bodies in traffic, can cover backs and tight ends in man, plus then is this rugged blitzer who can help free up lanes as the actual setup man on pressure looks. So 1 pick for all of these non-first round teams. That wraps up this exercise for me, and kind of puts a cap on the pre-draft season at least, as we're just days away from the big show, and I honestly can't wait. Feel free to let me know how much you love or hate what I did for your team, or anything else you're interested in down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and really for anybody who supported my work throughout the last couple of months and beyond. It's actually the busiest time of the year for me, with all the work I put into this, and sometimes I sit there on an evening like, why the hell am I watching this guy from Holy Cross? But I love finding hidden gems, and then when you guys ask me about some random player where I can give him my insights, and you thank me for it, that's really cool. Of course, we'll hear a lot of BS leading up to Thursday, with false information being spread, and opinions on players being out there, so you can follow me on social media, links are down below in the description, to help us sort through it a little bit, and hear my thoughts on stuff that I think is actually relevant. I'll also be putting out a graphic on my favorite late round sleepers these next couple of days still, before commenting on a bunch of the selections we see throughout the weekend. I'll have a day 2 mock coming out on Friday, just from one of the mock machines, which I got multiple exact player team fits correct last year actually, and then I'm still considering if I'll be doing my extensive divisional draft breakdown series again over the next several weeks, which I've done these last few years. Feel free to let me know what you'd be interested in. Make sure not to miss any of this if you enjoy my content, and thanks again for all the support. So until then, see you later. Peace!